But if this does crash, we will not try to recover it because that is just too much. We will reschedule it down the line either for next week or the week after. Please note that this meeting is being recorded for later posting to the public. And also we have media in attendance today to help keep the public informed on the critical issues having to do with the drought. So we appreciate the media's participation. We really do. And we're going to ask that we hold questions till the end to ensure that we have time to cover all the material. But if you have a question really pertinent to one of the subject areas and you really got to get it in there, we got a small enough group now that we can do that. But only if it's a really good question, which I'm sure they all are. All right, next slide, please, Brandon. All right, pretty packed agenda today, so we're going to try and move at speed. We're going to review in a couple different areas. First, we'll start with the current drought conditions and forecast with Mary. Then we'll run through the drought impacts as we're seeing them across our various functional areas, both within the Water Division here at DES and at Department of Agriculture and with our UNH Extension teammates, and then, of course, forest fires with DNCR and how they're doing. Then we're going to talk about the new Emergency Drought Assistance Initiative, the EDA, that has started in the last couple of weeks. We're going to walk you through that. Then we're going to start on some initial observations for lessons learned from this drought, and then build on those to take a look at the long-term forecast, the 90-day forecast, and start reviewing multi-year drought experiences that the state had in 1964 to 1966. And then, of course, we'll check around the table on messaging. Stacy will get us kick off on messaging, and then we'll go around the table for all of you that might have key input or questions or ideas or other aspects. So that's our agenda today. Let me start it off with the introduction. Next slide, please. So everybody saw the drought map came out this morning. We still have D1 across basically the entire state, 99%. And we did have some reduction in D3 in the southeast corner of the state. And there was a pretty interesting discussion this week between our regional people. We need everybody to mute, please, or Carolyn will hunt you down and mute you independently. We did have a good discussion this week between our regional people who help prepare the Drought Monitor that provide the input from across New England or northeastern United States, and the national folks. There was some professional debate there on how much D3 should or could be reduced based on previous precipitation, ongoing and forecasted precipitation, surface water levels, and groundwater. And we're going to walk that through with you in pretty good detail so that you understand why we're still at D3 and why D3 got a little bit smaller. But the prognosis for next week is we may be creeping back up. Next slide, please. And here's why. The tough question of the day that we get asked pretty routinely is, it's been raining, at least in some people's viewpoint. Why are we still talking about drought? And these two charts really summarize it well. And if you could get your mouse up there for me, Brandon. The chart on the lower left, you can see the black line dropping down. And what this is the deficit at Concord for rainfall from the blue line, the horizontal blue line that indicates average. And you can see that we are down 7.5 inches of precipitation. And so if we get a 1-inch storm or a 2-inch storm coming through, or a 1/4 inch in water equivalent of snow, that really doesn't move that. You can just see that it's been coming up a little bit throughout the month of October, but has not really recovered substantially. The chart on the right shows it also over at UNH Durham, which is pretty much central to the D3 zone. And you can see that purple line that Brandon's highlighting there is the 2020 line, is actually lower than the 2016 line, the last drought, which is that bluish sort of aqua color, all of which are well below the mustard colored line, which is the Durham average rainfall from January through to December. So it's this lack of precipitation combined with the low groundwater and the highly variable surface waters that we've got that really has us still in D3. And that's the conversation that the National Weather Service, NOAA, and the other folks are having when they develop the designation for us. And we can talk about that some more a little bit later on. I think at this point, we'll go ahead to the next slide. We'll take it over to you. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you very much. This is going to be brief. I also wanted to let you know I need to leave the meeting early, unfortunately, to teach. So please let me know if you have any questions. I'd be happy to respond via email or if you want to give me a call. But I just kind of want to, I guess, stress the reasons for why we've seen improvement over much of the state. However, we still are within extreme drought in the southeastern part of the state, including Stratford and Rockingham counties. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the map to the left shows the U.S. Drought Monitor change, and to the right is the statewide total precipitation for the month of October. So this is kind of a good news and no news situation. So we fortunately had rain in October, ranging from lower values, so 3 inches across the south, up to about 8 inches in areas north, particularly over the mountains. So this rainfall that we received over the month of October was the most monthly total rainfall we've received since April. Our dry period really extended from May through September. And so the addition of this rainfall led to improvements across northern New Hampshire and western New Hampshire. We saw an improvement from D2 severe drought to D1 moderate drought. Next slide, please. And with the above normal and near normal rainfalls through the north and the west, 28-day stream flows responded. So we had some short-term response in surface water flows across a lot of the state. However, that little spot there in the southeastern New Hampshire, surface water remains below normal. Next slide. And we also see, when you're looking back over the 6 months, so this goes all the way back to May, which is when the drought really started, we still see large precipitation deficits occurring in southeastern New Hampshire, particularly over Stratford County, which is where the extreme drought remains. So the combination of high rainfall across northern New Hampshire led to improvements there. Near normal precipitation allowed some improvements to occur over the west. But we're still very adamant that conditions are dry given the low 6 months, so long-term precipitation deficits, which are as much as 10 inches or more at many weather stations in the seacoast area. And we also see below normal stream flows and groundwater levels in these areas as well. So next slide. And so with that, we have, of course, improvements due to the increased precipitation we received over the month of October. We also see a reduced demand for surface moisture as our temperatures decline, and they will continue to have kind of a negligible amount of demand from the atmosphere through the cold season. But I just want to stress that even with the rain in October, particularly across southeastern New Hampshire, we did not get nearly enough to result in improvements there. So looking at the long-term precipitation deficits, southeastern New Hampshire remains extremely dry. And we have not only precipitation deficits, but corresponding below normal stream flow and groundwater levels. We don't see any real relief coming over the next week. And the outlooks for precipitation are for near normal or uncertain over the next several weeks, although we are expected to be a little bit warmer than normal in the sort of 2 week to monthly forecast. So we don't have any kind of indication that we're going to get any type of significant rainfall over the next month. So expect that this drought conditions, especially in southeastern New Hampshire, to persist. And we need to kind of be concerned about what the groundwater levels are going to be going into the cold season as we get into December and starting to see some frozen soils occurring. Okay, with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions over email if you have any. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Mary. We'll get any questions to you. We appreciate it, and have a good time in your class. Raise more engineers and environmental scientists, please. All right, Ted.
So thanks, Tom and Mary. Just quickly looking at where are we at with stream flow around the state, following up on Mary's good presentation there. You can see that we do have some improvements in some parts of the state. You can see that the northern parts, especially lakes area, we're seeing pretty good improvement. In fact, those flows are up, in some cases up almost close to the median. But we still have in the southern and southeastern part of the state, you see that we have flows down into, the lowest 10% as measured on those historically. Measured on those days historically. Sorry, getting all my adjectives and verbs mixed up here. So we are still very much in deficit on these streams as we head into winter. If you could go to the next slide, please. Just a couple of things on the in-stream flow program. I've been reporting on this as we've had our meetings, and certainly on the Lamprey and the Souhegan rivers, which have in-stream flow, protected in-stream flows that have been identified, and management plans, which go along with those for all the water users and dam owners in those watersheds. They have been engaged in enacting those water management plans, implementing them all summer since really pretty much since June. And you can see here this is the protected in-stream flow tracking chart for the Lamprey River on the left there. And what you see is the flows that were down significantly through the summer. The green lines showed when we did pulse releases through from Lake Pawtuckaway, and Mendham's Pond, and those to augment the river flow to benefit the aquatic life. And you can see that where we are now is river flows are certainly going up in the Lamprey, and some of that has to do with the fall drawdowns of the lakes. Similarly, you can see the drawdown and the natural drawdown of Pawtuckaway Lake on the other graph there, which shows both 2020 and 2016. And what you see is that those curves look remarkably similar. The droughts are pretty close in terms of their impacts on the rivers. Those two, our most recent droughts, are very similar. And what you see at the tail end, though, is the difference is that in 2016, the red line, the water levels went right back up in the fall. And here this year, we're seeing them continuing to draw down. And they'll draw down along this curve as it normally would as being managed. So the pulse releases that we did had very little impact on the actual lake level. It was evaporation and the lack of rainfall over the course of the summer, which drew the lake down. And then finally, the last slide here, talking about the Souhegan River. And again, you see this looking at 2016 and 2020, where the pattern was a little bit different in the Souhegan, and now things are a little bit improved, but still below some of those management levels, the critical flow levels that we would want to at least be able to see that in the river. So it's still very dry. A couple of just lessons learned here while we're on that theme. I think Tom's going to talk about lessons learned, is that when we started to do pulse releases from the Lamprey this year, things were so dry that those releases didn't behave exactly as we had wondered and what we had thought. And the reason is because it was so much lower than we had ever done any of the testing on this, that a lot of that water sort of just disappeared into the ground. And the stream beds were so warm that a lot probably evaporated as well. So we're learning a lot about this. And as we move on to other rivers around the state, trying to implement in-stream flow protection, these will be some of the lessons that will be learned and take with us. So we're going to be watching to see what happens over the winter and see where we are in the spring, because again, as we start looking towards next summer, we'll be making sure that the folks in both the Lamprey and the Souhegan who have water management plans are potentially ready to implement them again if we don't see improvement. I'll let that go on to the next speaker. Thanks.
Thanks, Ted. I'm Jim Gallagher from the Dam Bureau at DES. As Ted indicated, we are in the middle of our drawdown season. After out of the 113 dams that DES owns, we draw down about 50 of the impoundments behind those dams. We do it for to provide storage for the inflow that you normally get in the springtime, and also to protect the shoreline structures from ice damage during the winter. And so with the precipitation that we've had, and with a couple of these drawdowns, that's why you're seeing the rivers running at normal levels. If you wanted to keep track of a lot of our lake levels, there is a webpage that we maintain with real-time data on a lot of our sites. This is, you can get at this watershed map here through our homepage, lake level data. I think it's one of the hot topics. Brings you to this page, and you can click on any of these watersheds here and take a look at what the lake level is in that watershed. Next slide, please. By clicking on the lamprey, for example, you come up with not only the lamprey basin, but all these other watersheds where we have dams that we actively operate in. Next slide, please. Clicking on the Pawtuckaway Lake icon, you see the real-time lake level elevation at Pawtuckaway. And we are in the drawdown season here, and as Ted indicated in one of his previous slides, well, we usually start the drawdowns on Columbus Day, which is sort of the end of the recreation season up here in New Hampshire, the surface water, or the lake recreation season anyway, in New Hampshire. It was a little bit delayed this year because the lakes were already down about a foot, or maybe even more than a foot. And so we waited until the lake level intersected the normal guide curve, like at Pawtuckaway, and Ted's graph from a couple of slides ago shows that pretty well. Again, you'll be driving around and see low lake levels. If you're driving along Route 4 and northward, see Northwood Lake low. It's not really because of the drought. It's because of the normal drawdowns that we do this time of year. Next slide, please. And lastly, just this is the summary that I've shown before. Current conditions of Lake Winnipesaukee. There we don't do a drawdown. You can see that red line. It's kind of leveled off now. It is because a function of the shutdown that we do. Actually do a 2-week shutdown of the river in October to allow for downstream water users, particularly dams and other folks along the river, to do repairs along the Winnipesaukee River. And that just ended. We're resuming normal flows in the Winnipesaukee River. The point is here, though, that even though the lake level is kind of leveled off, it's leveling off at a level that is below the sort of standard deviation, that blue shaded curve. And down at the bottom again, just reinforcing what we've been talking about before, we're still lagging behind in cumulative rainfall for the year. And the next slide, I guess, is for groundwater, perhaps. Stream flows, groundwater. Shane, take it away.
Thanks, Jim. Oh, boy. Can you hear me, Carolyn? Okay. Sometimes my phone times out. Thanks, Jim. Just a couple of slides here to give an update on groundwater conditions. You can see on the left the map, the similar map that you've been seeing for the past several months. Have reformatted it a little bit to show a couple things. You can tell by the dots on the map that in some areas of the state, groundwater levels have improved. We did our measurements last week for October. Since September, they actually came up, particularly in northern New Hampshire, where Mary was showing that they had the precipitation this month. Lisbon and Lancaster and Colebrook all came up. Lisbon and Lancaster came up over a foot. Nashua came up over a foot. But in the central part of the state, all of the towns that are identified in a pink color, like Franklin, New London, Concord, Hooksett, all of those wells experienced continued declines in water level from September to October, and that corresponds with the area, generally in the area of the D3 and the continued precipitation deficit areas. The decreases ranged from 0.16 feet at Concord to 0.197 feet at New London, and everything in between. So Ossipee, Deerfield, Epping have experienced continued water decline. So the groundwater in many wells in the central part of the state from our monitoring network does continue to decline, even though we've seen improvements in other areas of the state. Next slide. And to give you an of how low a few of our wells currently are, and sort of connecting with those lessons learned that Tom is going to talk about a little later on, we've been trying to experiment with some better ways to display the data and make it more meaningful for all of you. So we do have 3 wells in the network, 2 of them on this slide. We have New Durham here in Concord, and the other well is in Deerfield. Basically, what you have on these graphs is in each graph, the blue line across the year from January to December is the average water level across the entire period of record for that month, for that well, over the course of a year. The 2 orange bars are the standard deviations, one standard deviation above and below that average. And basically, what that basically is a good indicator to show is that about 65 to 70% of all of our measurements over the periods of record exist within that band. If your water level gets above or below that standard deviation band, what that's a good indicator of is that you're either much higher than normal or much lower than normal. The red line is the trend line for water levels in 2020, and you can really see it on the right for the Concord well. That's our well that's into the superficial materials above bedrock right here in Concord. And you can see for October, our measurement is just below that lower standard deviation. So it's within that lower 25% of, or 15 to 20% of total measurements we have for that well for that period for the month of October. Basically meaning that water levels there are still very, very low compared to what we normally see for the well. And we have 3 of these wells, New Durham, Concord, and Deerfield, that are in this particular situation within the area of the D3. So, we still do have groundwater concerns, particularly in the central part of the state. We are going to be increasing our frequency of measurement. So actually, for 14 wells in the area, the D3, we're going to be going back out next week and measuring them. So we're increasing the frequency of those measurements, and we'll keep doing that until that area subsides and drought concern lessens in the state. So we have the information for making the drought maps and for all of you. And I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Shane. Hi, I'm Brandon Kernan. I'm Administrator of the Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau, and I'm going to give you an update on drinking water supplies throughout the state. As you've heard at previous meetings, we maintain a weekly list of water restrictions that either towns or water systems put into place. At this time, we have 117 water systems that have mandatory restrictions and 50 that have voluntary restrictions. I thought we were at a place where we could say we don't need to think so much about outdoor water use as we move into the fall, but it looks like we're going to have a pretty warm weekend. So these restrictions are still important for at least another week or so. If you look at the number of people impacted by restrictions, it's almost 345,000 people. We also have 8 towns that have put in restrictions separate of their water systems. So that applies to everyone, all homeowners that have a residential well or are on public water supply. And so about 66,000 people are impacted in those towns with restrictions. The good news is that our public water systems are faring well. We've only had a few public water systems that had to develop an emergency source of water during the drought. And we've only had a few that have had to haul water in and fill up their tanks during the drought. And I think a lot of that's because of systems making a lot of improvements as we've gone through droughts over the last 20 years, especially in 2016. For residential wells, the department does get reports filed within 90 days when someone has a well deepened or replaced or hydrofrac'd. And so since about late June, we've had 190 reports submitted to us indicating that work has been done to replace or improve an existing well. And again, the water well contractors have 90 days to file these reports. So this data will continue to come in, and that 190 number will increase over the next couple of months. We did make a call to the largest water well contractors the week of October 19th to see what their work has been since June. And from that calling process, we found that about 1,000 residential wells have been impacted. So either they were replaced, deepened, or had a pump lowered, or hydrofractured. Also, I'll note, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, about 110 people that qualify based on their income have asked for assistance under the Emergency Drought Assistance Initiative, which we'll talk about in a minute. So as far as messaging water conservation, of course, for another week or so, while we still have this warm weather, restricting or not using water outside for discretionary uses is important to continue that practice of not using water outside. But as we turn towards winter, there's still a lot that residents can do to make sure they're conserving their water supply so that their wells will make it through this drought, or this drought that we're not sure when it's going to end. And one of the biggest things is to make sure you don't have leaks. Running toilets can cause hundreds of gallons a day to be wasted, and day after day of that occurring will make a well to water, especially a low-yielding well. Also, it's important as we get into cold weather that people winterize their water lines, that they don't rely on continuously running their water as a way to keep their pipes from freezing. If they do that, they may run out of water, and then they'll have frozen pipes. So it's really important just to take that extra effort to winterize and not just run your water. Then lastly, it's just important to note that just by modernizing either water fixtures or water using appliances in your home, you can cut water use by 50%. Today's toilets use less than 2 gallons per flush. You can compare that to the ones sold in the 80s that might have used 5 or 7 gallons per flush. And so you can substantially improve it, your water use efficiency, by changing things like your toilets, your clothes washers, and even using new shower heads that use less water. And this graph here just shows the comparison of a non-conserving home with the blue bars to the white bars, a home that has efficient fixtures and appliances. And so you can really make yourself more drought resistant. And then if you look big picture, you're just not saving water in your own home. You're also saving energy, either at your own home, by your well pumping, or by the water system. And then if you go down the line, almost all energy types rely on water. So there's more water being conserved even outside of your home that you don't see. With that, I'll turn it over to the Department of Agriculture and Commissioner Jasper.
Commissioner Jasper, are you out there? All right, George, would you care to comment? George Hamilton, comment a little bit on ag impacts that you're seeing?
Well, at this time, with most of the farms are shutting down for the winter, so the impact isn't as great, but we're starting to look back and see some of the effects of what the drought has done. We're seeing anywhere from 25 to 75% of the hay crop reduce. That could be basically a loss of $3 to $9 million in product sold. The problem is those farms that are dependent upon those forage crops have to go out and find more other places that have forage crops that they can purchase, and they're going to be purchasing them at a higher price. So the end result is an increase in their profitability on their bottom line, making it tougher for the livestock farming industry. So we have a lot of concerns with that. I do have some concerns with a dryness going into wintertime on our perennial crops and how they will recover. It's still awful dry. I was in a couple orchards digging down through, and you get down more than a foot, it's still awful dry in the subsurface. So that could have effect of how far the coldness goes down and causes root damage with the thawing and heaving during the winter months. I'm hoping for a good snow cover to help with the crops. That's all I have at this time.
That's perfect, George. Thank you very much, and we appreciate you being back up. You should play for the Red Sox. Over to our friends at Forest Protection, please.
Hey, good afternoon. Doug Miner with Division of Forest and Lands. I'd like to give you a little bit of an update on the wildfire situation. Fortunately, the rainfall that we did receive in the last 30 days has helped to stabilize the threat of wildfires across the state. We continue going through fall to monitor conditions. Obviously, we're still going to have some brush fire activity, but the magnitude of those fires hopefully is going to be far less than what we were anticipating about a month ago. Next slide, please. One of the indicators of that and that improvement is KBDI. About a month ago, we were well into the 650 range, which is getting up toward concerning numbers in terms of the wildfire threat as it pertains to ground fires and deeper burning ground fires that we were seeing in the last month. We're seeing levels down to 15 in the Pittsburgh area now, and our highest is about 365 in the southeastern portion of the state. So we've had not a tremendous amount of rain, but enough with the ending of the growing season to actually benefit us pretty immensely with the reduction in KBDI. Next slide, please. Energy release component, essentially a tool or indices that would indicate the BTUs that a fire would actually produce, burning in a wildland situation, that we're actually down currently to zero again for ERC. So that's great news as well. Next slide. Our burning index, which kind of is indices of how difficult fire containment can be across wildland fuels and topography, that also has shown dramatic improvement with that indices down to zero as well. Next slide. Fire restrictions that were put in place. I'd like to thank the governor and the governor's office, as well as sister agencies, the White Mountain National Forest. I think it was a good cooperative effort, but it's pretty rare that we get to this situation where we actually request a proclamation to restrict outdoor burning. Landowners were still able to have their backyard campfires during this period, but restrictions were placed on fires on any public lands. And then the Category 3 fires, the larger brush pile burning, debris pile burning, was actually banned during this period. The governor enacted the proclamation on September 24th and recently released it on October 20th with a second proclamation. Proved to be a very valuable tool to get public cooperation as well as coordination through the local fire wardens to help enforce this. It's not something that we would normally take or go to this level if we didn't feel that it was a significant risk, and it really did help us kind of bridge the gap there for the last month or so when conditions were very concerning. White Mountain National Forest has also lifted their restrictions across the forest as well. Next slide, please. As we continue into the fall, as I mentioned earlier, our fire season is not over yet by any means, but despite the drought conditions that we're still dealing with, we're going to remain vigilant and deal with any wildfire threat that we may encounter this fall. The cooler temperatures prior to this coming week here have helped to some degree. In addition to the precipitation, our 110, 100, and 1,000-hour fuel complexes around the state, the moisture levels on those have increased significantly. So we feel we're in a much better place right now. We're still going to see some fire activity, but the size of the fires are going to be manageable for what we usually encounter. The spring fire conditions, there's a lot of variables that are going to play into that. We're still obviously not out of the drought conditions here this fall, and it looks like this is going to last for a while, but depending on what we get for precipitation this fall and snow cover this winter, is going to dramatically affect what we see for a spring fire season. One of the bigger factors for the spring season is whether or not we get significant snowfall, enough snow cover to actually compact those wildland fuels, those grasses and leaf litter, the flashy type fuels that are the first to burn in the spring. If we don't have a significant snow load to compact those, being elevated higher off the ground, those fuels are more volatile and produce flame lengths that are much more concerning and more difficult for fire suppression efforts to deal with. So no crystal ball there, but we're going to continue to monitor through the fall, and hopefully we can have better fire conditions, I guess, in the spring. Next slide. If anyone has any questions, feel free to give me a call at the phone number listed, and my email address is there as well. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Captain. Over to you, Brandon.
Thank you. I'm just going to give a quick overview of a new program that was established. It's called the Emergency Drought Assistance Initiative, and effective about 2 weeks ago from 2 weeks back from yesterday, the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust approved $1.5 million to help residential well owners that are having impacts due to drought. And basically, the program is available for anyone who is at 80% of the median household income for their area. The homeowners have to demonstrate that they're a resident of New Hampshire and that their well is serving their primary residence. And then there's going to be a process where DES approves applications for this assistance based on income verification, as well as verifying that they have a well that's been impacted by a drought. And the program does a few different things. One, it provides immediate assistance to those eligible homeowners by providing short-term bottled water. So once they fill out a survey, they'll be on a list to get bottled water or perhaps vouchers for bottled water so that they have water for drinking and cooking. Then they'll work with a water well contractor to submit an application to address their wells that are failing, and they'll either be able to mitigate their impact by deepening the well, installing a new well, hydrofracturing the well, or lowering a pump, or by connecting to an existing community water system if one is nearby. The amount of funding that's available to eligible homeowners depends on their income. If a household makes less than 50% of the median statewide household income, they'll be eligible for 100% assistance minus $250. And so for the statewide median, 50% of the median statewide household income is about $37,000. Households that have an income of 50 to 80% of the median area household income will be eligible for up to 50% assistance. The eligibility date for this program will be retroactive going back to June 23rd, 2020. That's the first week the U.S. Drought Monitor classified New Hampshire as being in a moderate drought. The end date has yet to be determined. There's criteria. It'll be when we have 4 consecutive weeks of being classified as a non-drought condition for a specific county or the adjacent counties. And so until your county or all the adjacent counties haven't been in a drought condition for 4 consecutive weeks, this program will still be ongoing. And to find more information about the program, just go to DES's homepage, des.nh.gov, and it's under what's hot, our hot topics. And then there's a link to where the homeowners can fill out a survey and ask for immediate assistance via bottled water, and then they'll get an application to apply for the more permanent assistance. Just to give you a summary of the activity to date, by county, we have about 110 inquiries, and just a list by county of who's asked for assistance with bottled water at this point. And these entities have all been mailed applications for long-term mitigation assistance. All right, thank you. Tom, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Brandon. like all great organizations, we try to improve through looking at lessons and lessons learned. To develop lessons and lessons learned, you start with observations. So we've started collecting up observations for things that occurred during 2020's drought. We use a little plus and minus sign over there. I assign the pluses and minuses. In other words, was that a good observation, something we did right, we should reinforce? Or was it something we need to do a little bit better at, or perhaps even substantially better at? Those are totally subjective on my part. If you don't like them, you drop me a line and tell me what your thoughts are. So I'll just briefly identify a couple of the hot ones on here. We did have very good early identification of this drought through great work by our snow monitoring folks. And that enabled some good things to happen, including the dam refills we talked about before, and the earlier messaging, which helped several of the towns out. We also have improved our messaging on the Drought Monitor. We have a lot more understanding of the drought designations, how they're developed, and how they need to be used. We have some improvements in groundwater monitoring, and Shane's already taken the lead on many of those, including that increased frequency, improved resolution, and better graphics, and integration of New Hampshire Geologic Survey and U.S. Geologic Survey. We've been thinking about a well watch and warning system, and we talked about that previously. We think that's important. And we've been working with the well drilling industry to talk about timeliness of drill reporting to help us, and working with the public to improve reporting on residential wells, which you just saw the first cut. Great credit to everybody who supports that webpage, and we appreciate that. The DMT group that we are here today needs some improvement. Potentially a legislative role needs to be developed. The drought plan that we work off is good up to a point, but it needs some authority behind it, and it needs to be in the state emergency operating plan, and we're working towards that. The coordination with the governor's office went very well this year, and Adam, we really appreciate your support and information flow back and forth on critical issues that really help a lot. Our in-stream flow program worked very well for the two rivers, the Lamprey and the Souhegan, but there were challenges in water management, and of course only 2 of our 19 designated rivers have completed the program, although 2 additional ones are very close behind the Lamprey and the Souhegan. Next page, please. The EDA program that Brandon just described was a big step forward for helping out the people of New Hampshire that are impacted severely, and we'd like to sustain that. We do need improved understanding of current climate models. The last really serious study of what climate models say for New Hampshire was about 5 years ago, published 4 years ago, written 5 years ago. And we need to update that, and there's been a lot of data and improved modeling since then. So we'll be working with Mary and Cam out at UNH to help us with that. We also have problems statewide with water usage during a drought. Landscapers, we've had repeated and numerous complaints of landscapers drawing water out of water bodies inappropriately. We have corporately owned businesses that are headquartered from outside the state that direct the owners here in the state to do things with their water, from watering their lawns and those sorts of things. We need to emphasize drought resistance landscaping. We need to look into much more serious water reuse. These are all pretty substantial areas that need focus. As Captain Miner just pointed out, our fire restrictions was a big step forward this year. We hadn't done that in some 20, 25 years, and it was very effective, as he described. And our towns overall have had a bit of a mixed experience. We had one town where the primary town well went dry, and they had some real challenges working through that. And of course, we continue to have challenges between mandatory and voluntary restrictions. We continue to evolve the role of the Drinking Water Trust Fund, and we have important ideas on resiliency that need to be talked about. And overall, we need to prepare better for the next drought, and we need a statewide strategy was one of the observations we received. If you have observations in your area that you'd like us to consider as we try to think about future droughts or the continuation of this one, by all means, email them over to me, and we'll put them on the list and see if we can continue to work on them. With that, over to Brandon to talk about what we're seeing long-term and what we saw in 65.
Thank you, Tom. This is a map similar to what's shown earlier, looking at the outlook for drought. And as presented earlier, it looks like drought will persist in the Northeast. That even though we may get some rainfall, we have a significant deficit. And so you can't help but to think about when this slow-moving disaster might end. You know, it could end in a month, or it could go on for 2 or 3 years. So it's instructive to look back at the 1960s drought, the most substantial multi-year drought in recent history. And so we have a few slides just going over some of the observations during that drought. Here's some graphics showing stream flow on the top and groundwater on the bottom of levels year to year, going from about 1961 to 1965, 1966. And you can see as the multi-year drought started, things were below level. Then as the colors get darker, things became more serious. And then the darkest colors seen on these maps show that record low stream flows were occurring in the Northeast and New Hampshire in the 60s drought. And so, we don't have a lot of storage in either surface water or groundwater in New Hampshire. And so even though we get a lot more rain than other parts of the country, our environment doesn't store water. And so when you have a multi-year drought, you will see dramatic changes in available water quantity very quickly. And it's just an excerpt from a federal document looking at the drought in the Northeast, where in the bottom paragraph is just talking about how President Johnson had provided additional financial resources to a number of states, including New Hampshire, because the drought was so serious in the 60s. And here's an excerpt from an annual report for Manchester Waterworks, where in the first paragraph where you see the asterisk, they're talking about the need to start thinking about developing additional water sources based on their experience in the drought. And they actually reference the Merrimack River, which they are actively building a new a new treatment plant for, and they have a new well with lateral pipes going underneath the river. But then also in the last paragraph, it talks about the need for solid, substantial, courageous long-term planning, that they've learned that lesson from the drought of the 60s. And I just want to point out in New Hampshire that has occurred. From the 60s on, you'll see substantial reports by the USGS, the Army Corps of Engineers, the regional planning commissions, the towns, identifying additional sources of water and diversifying and increasing the number of sources that they have based on the 60s drought. And so today, those water sources are still in use. You can see from the development records that we have that this drought definitely caused a lot of activity to occur. I also want to point out, just in the last 20 years, New Hampshire's done so much to make itself more resilient for a drought like the 1960s drought. The current water line extension to southern New Hampshire from Manchester that goes through Derry down to Windham, Salem, Hampstead, Atkinson, Plaistow. That's a significant improvement in providing redundancy for a number of water systems as far as their sources go. The Merrimack River is a very good source of water, both in quality and quantity. And now those communities will have their existing sources and the new source of water to make them more resilient. And one other thing to note is that pipeline, by the fact it touches Salem, makes it so that we're actually even interconnected with Massachusetts and Methuen. It's not an active interconnection, but it can be opened and used if needed. Similarly, Nashua and its water system provides backup water supply to a large number of towns, Milford, Merrimack, and Hudson. And so already our southern part of the state, where we have the highest number of residents, have a lot of redundancy relative to the water supply options. Just some pictures of what it looked like in the 60s. Quabbin Reservoir was down to 40%, which is a very big reservoir, so it's a significant number. And you can compare that to an image that's this year on Lake Massabesic, where historical artifacts are being found, not because the water level's been drawn down so low that people are able to explore more easily where they weren't able to before. Just some perspectives from the 60s drought. I think at that time they felt like they had little preparation and guidance on how to react. We're in a better position now, but as Tom talked about in Lessons Learned, we continue to do more to be ready for that multiple year drought, which will come at some point. We have benefited from the number of studies that have occurred since the 60s drought and the work that's continued from 2000 to 2020, where we have, as a state, really improved regionalization and the management of water resources by removing legal barriers, by communities developing relationships and really taking the lead on their own to develop interconnections or joint projects with water supply. Our state has also empowered and enabled towns to do more with water use restrictions. So if there's a drought, discretionary water uses can be controlled by towns. And then as a state, we've developed conservation programs and water withdrawal programs that really allow us to ensure that water is being used efficiently and appropriately when there's a drought situation occurring. Then I'll turn it over to Stacy Herbold.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Stacy Herbold with the Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau, and I'm going to go over some of our drought communications and messaging since we all last met last month. I don't know if you've heard the forecast for the next few days, but it is going to be warm and dry, with it being in the mid 60s to high 60s in the south and low 60s to mid 60s in the north. So while we thought that we were really almost done with those outdoor water restrictions, this meeting came at a timely moment where hopefully the follow-up press release can remind everyone that many systems and municipalities still have restrictions in place. And while they want to get outside this weekend to do chores, to really hold back on that water use. So this past month, the main themes of our press releases and other publications have really been looking back at drought development and the drought management actions taken since June, and current issues, mostly focused on residential well shortages, but the main message pivoting from conserving outdoors to conserving indoors, including what Brandon spoke about earlier. Also, pushing those conservation actions a little harder on those private well owners with the message that water shortages on private residential wells have been widespread. We've also asked municipalities to assess the need to set up emergency supplies. So how have we gone about doing that? As you can see on this slide, these are many of our communication tools. The November, December environmental news is the main newsletter out of DES. That the lead article was on drought. Supply lines with the source went out last month. That goes out to the public water system industry that also focused on drought and water conservation. Very timely, the Hippo contacted us. They wanted to do an interview about water conservation. So that was put out this month. And then, of course, we have the press releases, the press release that followed up the last DMT, again, pushing conservation to indoors. I believe then, too, we were still focused a bit on the fire danger and the push to support local farmers as the agricultural growing season was coming to an end. And we also push out these messages. We're on the 19th week of issuing drought update emails to the public water systems and municipalities across the state. And that's where we can provide any new information coming out, including the new messaging. So again, that's where we've really been talking about conserving, sending out the message, yes, the drought is persisting. It's most likely going to continue into the winter. And along with this, we're able to take that weekly email and develop it into some of our social media posts. So it works well. Also this month, as mentioned, we had the Emergency Drought Assistance to Low-Income Residential Well Owners develop. So we've been doing some press on that. And I guess the one last tool I haven't mentioned is the Municipal Ecolink that goes out monthly to municipalities. And that's where we provide any updates or new messaging to municipalities. Looking forward, we are going to keep pushing that indoor conservation message. Also start looking a little bit at what other messages we may want to push to municipalities and public water systems in preparation for next season. I do want to offer, if anyone wants to be on that email list of those weekly updates, so the water systems or municipalities, they can let me know. It is targeted at that audience, but you may have interest. It does include drought updates and forecasts. Thank you.
That's great, Stacy. And I want to call out both New Hampshire Public Radio and WMUR. Both took the time to really do background work and to talk with us in detail to make sure they really understood beyond just initial messaging. They really understood what was going on with the drought. And both of them have really spent some time learning what's going on. All right, let's pause there. That was a lot of transmit. Let's see what questions we have. All right. That makes for a quicker meeting, that's for sure. All right. Let's see if anybody has any specific recommendations on specific impacts or recommendations on public messaging or next steps we should be taking. All right. Well, as always, everybody has my email address and Carolyn's also. And if you have any additional comments, questions, concerns, ideas, observations, or messages or messaging approaches, by all means, please drop us a line. So one last call for any other questions. All right. 3:30 sharp. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Keep doing great work.